Why does a tiny strip of land, smaller than many European provinces, ignite centuries of conflict? What invisible force turns ancient olive groves and peaceful pastures into battlegrounds for identity? And how can people thousands of miles away argue over stones and hills they've never seen? This land, called Palestine by the world, is no empty canvas. It is a living, breathing organism, soaked with blood, sweat, and prayers of countless generations, an unforgiving stage for irreversible choices. Friends, be sure to subscribe to my Quiet History channel, like it, and leave a comment of at least 7 words. This is necessary for the channel to function. Share this video with others if you think it's important. Thank you. Long before Greeks set foot here, long before maps and treaties carved it into pieces, this land already knew empires, prophets, and conquerors. It cradled 3 of the world's greatest religions and fueled some of humanity's longest and most brutal wars. How did this small piece of earth become the epicenter of a conflict no diplomat, soldier, or passing century has resolved? The answer lies buried in the soil, beneath memories older than recorded time. 8,000 years before the Common Era, Jericho stood as one of the oldest cities on earth. Its walls whispered secrets from the dawn of civilization, a time when humanity was just learning to build. This was the land of Canaan, a rugged stretch between sea and desert, wedged between 2 of the ancient world's greatest powerhouses, Egypt and Mesopotamia. But Canaan was no united nation. It was a patchwork of city-states, each with its own rulers, gods, and agendas. Amid these city-states, a new wave of people arrived, Semitic tribes who would later call themselves Israelites. They did not come as mighty conquerors with vast armies. Instead, they were shepherds and herders, settling slowly on hills and in valleys. The Bible tells of Abraham, who left Ur of the Chaldeans for the land of Canaan, led by divine command. While historians struggle to confirm the facticity of such tales, archaeology reveals a profound shift around the middle of the 2nd millennium BCE. In the mountainous regions of Canaan, a new culture emerged, distinctive in worship, lifestyle, and identity. These people shunned idols, forbade images of their god Yahweh, and bore a unique style of pottery. By the end of the 2nd millennium, 2 small kingdoms had sprung up, Israel in the north, wealthier and more fertile, and Judah in the south, smaller and poorer, yet home to a city destined to change history forever. Jerusalem. When King David captured it from the Jebusites around 1000 BCE, it was nothing more than a modest fortress perched on a hill. Yet David made it his capital, and his son Solomon built the temple, the sacred heart of religious life, believed to be the dwelling place of Yahweh himself. The temple's walls gleamed with cedar from Lebanon, its interior glittered with gold, and in the innermost sanctum lay the Ark of the Covenant, inscribed with stone tablets bearing divine commandments. But the united kingdom of David and Solomon was doomed to fracture. After Solomon's death in 922 BCE, the realm split into 2, Israel in the north and Judah in the south. The northern kingdom, larger and richer, would fall to the Assyrians in 722 BCE, scattering the 10 tribes into history's shadows, dissolving their identity into the surrounding lands. What began as a slow, almost unnoticed movement of shepherds would spiral into a saga of kingdoms, temples, exile, and exile again. Each decision carved deeper wounds into the land and into the hearts of its people. These choices of kings, priests, warriors etched a legacy of conflict destined to echo through millennia. The story of this land is the story of irreversible choices, human fear, and the relentless march of history that no man or God can turn back. Was this land ever truly peaceful? Before the names and borders we know, before the flags and factions, it was a crucible of forces far beyond any single epoch. The tension between survival and faith, conquest and identity, remains unresolved to this day. And so we begin, not with modern nations, but with a world where no one yet bore the names we know, only the weight of decisions that shaped the future. Follow the tangled path of these ancient choices, the rise and fall of kingdoms, and the birth of faiths that changed the world. This is not just history. It's a living, breathing drama, an unending conflict written in stone and blood, urging us to ask, how did this land come to divide humanity for centuries? And can it ever heal? Subscribe to Quiet History and join us as we unravel the relentless saga of the land once called Canaan, today's Palestine, where every stone tells a story of fate, fear, and decisions that shaped civilization itself. What does it take for a people to survive the unthinkable? When Babylon's king Nebuchadnezzar razed Jerusalem and its temple in 586 BCE, he shattered the heart of Judea and dragged much of its population into exile. Could this catastrophe have been the end of the Jewish people? Yet, in the shadow of destruction, a fierce resilience was born. In Babylonian captivity, the Jewish identity did not dissolve. It was reforged. Without a temple, without a homeland, they recorded sacred text, codified laws, and built a religious system that transcended geography and ruin. When Cyrus the Great of Persia granted permission to return in 538 BCE, the Jewish people came back transformed, armed with written tradition, a renewed sense of chosenness, and an unshakable cultural core. But the land they reclaimed was no longer theirs alone. The Persian grip loosened, only to be replaced by the sweeping tide of Hellenism. Alexander the Great's conquests paved the way for Greek dynasties to dominate Judea. First the Ptolemies from Egypt, then the Seleucids from Syria. Greek culture flooded the East like an unstoppable wave, bringing gymnasiums, theaters, new gods, and ideas. Many Jews embraced this cultural tsunami, but it sparked fierce opposition. In the 2nd century BCE, Seleucid king Antiochus IV took a decisive and brutal step. He sought to forcibly Hellenize Judea, defiling the temple and outlawing Jewish rituals. This ignited the Maccabean revolt, a savage guerrilla war that against all odds succeeded. Judea won independence, ruled nearly a century under the Hasmonean dynasty, but the world beyond was shifting dangerously. To the west, Rome was rising, a force destined to consume the entire Mediterranean. In 63 BCE, Roman general Pompey stormed Jerusalem, turning Judea into a Roman vassal. Though local rulers kept a veneer of power, real control rested with Rome and its puppets. One such ruler was Herod the Great, ruthless and brilliant, who transformed the temple into an architectural marvel. Yet beneath this grandeur, resentment festered. Herod's temple, with its massive white stone walls and golden ornamentation, drew Jews from across the empire for festivals like Passover and Sukkot. Jerusalem had become the spiritual heart of Judaism, but the Roman yoke sparked deep hatred. The province was a powder keg, high taxes, foreign laws that insulted religious sensibilities, and Roman soldiers who ruled with arrogant brutality. Amid this tension, messianic hopes swelled. The Jewish people longed for a savior, a Davidic king who would crush Rome and restore Israel's kingdom. In this volatile landscape, a Jewish preacher named Jesus of Nazareth was crucified under Governor Pontius Pilate. At the time, his death seemed just one more failed revolutionary act. But the story did not end there. Jesus' followers claimed he had risen from the dead and was the promised Messiah. What began as one sect among many would ignite a movement that would reshape the world. Christianity was born. Meanwhile, unrest in Judea escalated. In the year 66 CE, a massive Jewish revolt erupted, throwing the Romans out of Jerusalem and minting coins that proclaimed, "Freedom for Jerusalem." The Roman response was swift and brutal. Emperor Vespasian and his son Titus led legions to crush the rebellion. The fate of a people hung in the balance as these legions marched toward the city's gates. The stakes were nothing less than survival itself. Centuries later, medieval Europe's ears would again prick at tales from the Holy Land. Christian pilgrims spoke of hardships visiting sacred sites under Muslim control. In one terrifying episode, the Fatimid Caliph al-Hakim ordered the destruction of the Church of the Holy Sepulchre in 1009. The act sent shockwaves through Christendom. The outrage culminated in 995, when Pope Urban II called for a crusade to reclaim Jerusalem, a call that would unleash waves of war and reshape the destiny of nations. The story of this land is woven with fateful choices, desperate struggles, and unyielding faith. Each decision carved paths that altered the fate of millions, echoing through history to this day. What will history demand from us? What sacrifices will define our future? Subscribe to Quiet History to continue exploring the pivotal moments that shaped our world. What drives tens of thousands of knights, peasants, and fortune seekers to abandon everything for a perilous journey east? Is it faith, greed, curiosity, or sheer desperation? The First Crusade, launched with feverish zeal, culminated in the capture of Jerusalem in the year 1099. But what followed was not a triumphant liberation. It was a merciless slaughter. Crusaders unleashed a brutal massacre, killing Muslims, Jews, and Eastern Christians alike. The streets ran ankle-deep in blood, a terrifying testament to the horrors of war. Contemporary witnesses could barely walk without sinking into the crimson tide. This was not a righteous conquest, but a savagery that would stain history forever. Yet from this chaos emerged the Crusader states, Jerusalem, Tripoli, Antioch, small Christian enclaves on a hostile, distant shore. For nearly 2 centuries, the Franks, how the locals called them, clung to a narrow strip of land along the coast. They built fortresses, traded goods, and sought to make this foreign ground their home. But the harsh climate, relentless diseases, and a fiercely hostile Muslim population made survival a constant battle. Their grip weakened as Islam rallied under a new leader, Saladin, the Kurdish general whose name would echo through history. In the year 1187, Saladin united Egypt and Syria and dealt a crushing blow to the Crusaders at the Battle of Hattin. Within months, he reclaimed Jerusalem, but unlike the Crusaders, he spared the city's inhabitants. Christians were allowed safe passage after paying ransom, a chivalry even European chroniclers could not ignore. Was this mercy a calculated move, or a mark of true nobility? Despite Saladin's honor, the Crusader dream was fading. Subsequent crusades failed to retake Jerusalem. The Franks held on to coastal strongholds for another century, until the year 1291, when the Mamluks, an Egyptian military caste, seized the last Crusader city, Acre. This was the final blow to Western presence in the Holy Land. The Mamluks ruled Palestine with iron resolve, fearing another Western invasion. They razed coastal cities to ruins, cutting off enemy access to vital ports. The region's economy collapsed, cities dwindled, and Palestine slipped back into obscurity as a poor provincial hinterland. Yet the spiritual significance of this land endured fiercely for Judaism, Christianity, and Islam alike. A new power arose in the 16th century, reshaping the destiny of Palestine. The Ottoman Empire, a Turkish state that had seized Constantinople in 1453, expanded relentlessly. In 1516, Sultan Selim I conquered Egypt, Syria, and Palestine, establishing Ottoman rule that would last 400 years, until the cataclysm of the First World War. The early Ottoman period brought relative prosperity. Sultan Suleiman the Magnificent restored Jerusalem's ancient walls, fortifications that survive today. His reign saw reforms, promotion of trade, and public works that revitalized cities like Jerusalem, Hebron, Nablus, Gaza, and Jaffa. These cities thrived as provincial centers amid a predominantly Arab Muslim population, alongside Christian and small Jewish communities. Remarkably, Jewish presence in Palestine never vanished, even after the Roman exile centuries earlier. Although often small and scattered, Jewish communities endured, mostly in sacred cities like Jerusalem, Hebron, Safed, and Tiberias. They dedicated themselves to Torah study and prayers, yearning for the Messiah's arrival. In the 16th century, Safed became a beacon for Jewish mysticism. Rabbi Isaac Luria emerged there, founding a transformative Kabbalistic tradition that would influence generations. For a fleeting moment, Safed was a spiritual hub for the Jewish world, a symbol of resilience amid exile and diaspora. Yet, for all its spiritual vibrancy, the Jewish population remained minuscule compared to the vast diasporas spread across Europe, North Africa, and the Middle East. Meanwhile, the mighty Ottoman Empire began to falter. By the 19th century, known as Europe's sick man, it lost control over many territories. Corruption plagued provincial governance, setting the stage for seismic upheavals to come. What would the next chapter hold for this ancient land? Would it rise anew from the shadows, or remain shackled by history's relentless march? The choices made in these turbulent centuries echo still, carved deeply into the soul of the Holy Land. Follow Quiet History for more stories that reveal how the threads of human fear, faith, and irreversible decisions weave the fabric of our past. What drives a people to seek a homeland where none has been for centuries? How do fear and hope collide to shape history? Could a single book ignite a movement that changes the course of nations? These questions pulse at the heart of a story that begins in a land scarred by neglect and tradition. Palestine, in the late 19th century, was a land stuck in time. Poor, backward, its people mostly rural farmers living in small villages. There were no railroads, no paved roads, no schools or hospitals. Literacy was scarce, and life flowed slowly, bound by ancient customs. Powerful clans ruled the villages, while respected religious leaders held sway over society. Ottoman officials collected taxes and kept order. Religious life was the core of existence, with mosques, churches, and synagogues dictating daily rhythms. Yet beneath this stillness, a storm was gathering. Forces from across the world were about to sweep into Palestine, forever altering its fate. Across Europe, a revolutionary idea was spreading. Nationalism, the belief that every people had the right to their own state. Greeks, Italians, Germans, and Englishmen fought for self-rule. This wave reached the Jewish communities scattered across the continent, communities burdened by centuries of persecution. In the Russian Empire, Jews lived confined within the Pale of Settlement, enduring pogroms and oppressive laws. Western Europe offered some relief after emancipation, yet no shield against persistent anti-Semitism. The infamous Dreyfus affair in France revealed a cruel truth. Assimilation offered no sanctuary from injustice. Theodor Herzl, an Austrian journalist covering the Dreyfus trial, came to a chilling conclusion. Jews would never be fully accepted in European society. His response was radical, a call for a Jewish state of their own. In 1896, he published The Jewish State, a manifesto urging the creation of an independent homeland in Palestine. This marked the birth of political Zionism, an ideology of national rebirth centered on the ancient city of Zion, Jerusalem. But this vision was not universally embraced. Many religious Jews viewed it as premature, waiting instead for a Messiah's return. Yet Herzl's movement demanded action, a bold step into the unknown. The late 19th and early 20th centuries ignited waves of Jewish immigration to Palestine, known as Aliyah. The first Aliyah, from 1882 to 1904, brought around 25,000 Jews, mostly fleeing persecution in the Russian Empire. The second Aliyah, from 1904 to 1914, brought roughly 40,000 immigrants, young idealists, many of whom embraced socialist ideals. These newcomers dreamed not just of settlement, but of forging a new society. Collective farms, known as kibbutzim, where land and labor were shared, and a revived Hebrew language would breathe life into their heritage. Hebrew had been a sacred language for 2,000 years, confined to prayers and ancient texts. Eliezer ben Yehuda devoted his life to resurrecting it as a spoken tongue. These pioneers spoke Hebrew to their children, birthing the first generation in millennia to claim it as their native language. But alongside this cultural renaissance, tensions simmered. The Arab population of Palestine numbered around 600,000 at the start of the 20th century, rooted in the land and wary of the changes unfolding. As more Jews sought refuge in Palestine, British authorities, now the mandate power after World War I, grew increasingly cautious. Many Jewish refugees escaping the horrors of Europe found their passage blocked. Ships packed with desperate souls tried to reach the shores, only to be intercepted by the British Navy and sent to internment camps on Cyprus. The world watched in horror as the ship Exodus, carrying 4,000 Holocaust survivors in 1947, was turned away and forced back to Europe. Images of emaciated refugees behind barbed wire shocked global conscience, exposing the harsh reality of politics and survival. Britain was exhausted by war and weary of ruling Palestine, unable and unwilling to maintain control. The Jewish community, the Yishuv, responded by organizing armed groups, most notably the Haganah, to defend their people and fight for their future. Each decision, each desperate choice, pushed the region inexorably toward a climax, one where fear, hope, and determination intertwined in a struggle with consequences still felt today. How could a land so quiet in its neglect become the crucible of a fierce national awakening? How did forgotten villages become battlegrounds of identity and survival? The answers lie in the collision of history's relentless forces set in motion by men like Herzl, and millions driven by a dream that would refuse to be extinguished. If you want to explore more stories where human courage and tragic choices shape history, subscribe to Quiet History. Join us as we uncover the past's gripping and unforgettable moments. What happens when a land is torn apart by impossible choices? When centuries-old dreams collide with the harsh reality of war? In 1947, Britain, exhausted and desperate, handed over the explosive problem of Palestine to the United Nations. The world watched as a special commission arrived, tasked with a mission that would change history forever: to divide a land soaked in blood and hope. But could a plan drawn on paper ever contain the storm brewing on the ground? On the 29th of November 1947, the UN General Assembly voted for Resolution 181. Palestine was to be split into two states, one Jewish, one Arab, with Jerusalem placed under international control. The Jewish leaders accepted the plan, though many felt the territory was too small, too constrained. The Arab side rejected it outright, branding it a legalized theft of their homeland. The rejection ignited a powder keg. Chaos erupted before the British mandate even ended on the 15th of May, 1948. Violence spiraled into civil war. Jewish and Arab communities clashed in brutal street battles and guerrilla attacks. On the 9th of April, 1948, a horrific massacre shattered any hope for peace. Fighters from Irgun and Lehi stormed the Arab village of Deir Yassin, slaughtering over 100 men, women, and children. The massacre sent shockwaves through the Arab population, sparking panic and mass flight. Thousands fled their homes, haunted by the fear that they might be next. On the 14th of May, 1948, David Ben-Gurion, the leader of the Jewish community, declared the birth of the State of Israel. The very next day, 5 Arab armies from Egypt, Transjordan, Syria, Lebanon, and Iraq invaded the former Palestine. What followed was the first Arab-Israeli War, a brutal conflict fueled by hope, fear, and desperation. The Arabs believed victory was certain, backed by superior numbers and regular armies. But the Israelis, better organized and fiercely motivated, held a secret advantage: weapons smuggled from Czechoslovakia. The war raged with shifting fortunes, each side tasting victory and defeat. Yet, as the ceasefire came in 1949, Israel had not only secured the territory allotted by the UN, but had expanded far beyond it. Transjordan seized the West Bank and East Jerusalem, including the Old City. Egypt took control of the Gaza Strip. But the Palestinian Arab state never materialized. For Palestinians, 1948 became the Nakba, the catastrophe. Around 700,000 Palestinians were uprooted, either fleeing or forcibly expelled from their homes. They sought refuge in neighboring countries: Lebanon, Syria, Jordan, Gaza, and the West Bank, clinging to the hope of return once the Arab armies triumphed. But victory never came. Instead, they found themselves trapped in refugee camps, living in tents, stripped of livelihoods and futures. Israel refused their return, fearing that their presence would undermine the Jewish character of the new state. Villages were razed or repopulated by Jewish immigrants, erasing the Palestinian presence. For Palestinians, it was a profound loss, a shattered homeland and a fractured identity. For Israelis, it was the fulfillment of a 2,000-year-old dream: independence, survival, and rebirth. Two irreconcilable truths collided violently on this contested land, setting the stage for decades of conflict and sorrow. Israel embarked on the monumental task of nation-building amid the flames of war and hostility. The population doubled within years, swelling with survivors of the Holocaust from Europe and Jews expelled from Arab countries like Iraq, Yemen, Morocco, and Egypt. Hundreds of thousands poured in, seeking safety and a new beginning. Yet the young state lived in austerity. Tents and temporary shelters were the norm, while infrastructure was painstakingly built. Swamps were drained, irrigation networks constructed, and collective farming communities, kibbutzim and moshavim, took root. This was a socialist experiment on a grand scale: collective land ownership, universal health care, free education. Hebrew was declared the official language, but the streets echoed with a chorus of tongues: Yiddish, Arabic, Russian, Polish, Ladino, Amharic, reflecting the diverse mosaic of immigrants. Meanwhile, Palestinian Arabs remained scattered, their voices silenced, their futures uncertain. The choices made in those fateful years forged a path of irreversible consequences, a legacy of fear, loss, and unyielding conflict. What price was paid for these decisions, and could the wounds ever truly heal? The story of 1948 is not just history. It is a relentless echo of human fear and irreversible choices, a testament to the fragile line between hope and despair. It demands we ask, who truly won, and who was left to lose everything? If you want to understand the full complexity of this story, subscribe to Quiet History for more deep dives into the moments that shaped our world. What does it mean to be trapped between borders drawn by others? Over 150,000 Palestinians remained inside Israel's new boundaries, granted citizenship, yet relegated to second-class status under military rule until 1966. Their lives were confined, restricted, defined by a looming sense of otherness. Meanwhile, the West Bank was annexed by Jordan, where citizens held Jordanian passports but had little sway in Amman's political halls. Gaza slipped under Egyptian control, a territory isolated and stateless, its people denied citizenship and left in limbo. This was not just geography, it was a cage, and the world watched silently as hundreds of thousands languished in refugee camps across Lebanon, Syria, and Jordan, sustained only by the fragile lifeline of the United Nations. But why were these refugees kept in limbo? Because giving up their claim to return would mean erasing their own existence. They clung to hope, blood tied to the land they were forced to abandon. Yet to their hosts they were a political tool, an unresolved wound feeding simmering tensions. Across the borders, violence festered. Palestinian fedayeen launched raids into Israeli settlements, assassinating civilians. Israel responded with harsh reprisals, destroying villages suspected of harboring fighters. Each act birthed another, an unending spiral of brutality. The cycle of pain tightened its grip as the world edged closer to the abyss. In October 1956, the fragile peace shattered. When Egypt's president Gamal Abdel Nasser nationalized the Suez Canal, Israel, Britain, and France retaliated swiftly. Israeli forces swept through the Sinai Peninsula and Gaza Strip, seizing ground with ruthless efficiency. Yet under intense American pressure, they retreated. The message was clear. Israel's military might was both potent and vulnerable. It was a stark warning that power alone could not guarantee security. A new game of shadows and alliances was beginning. In 1964, the creation of the Palestine Liberation Organization marked another deadly turning point. Nasser sought to control the Palestinian cause, using the PLO as a political instrument. But emerging from its ranks was Yasser Arafat, a figure who would redefine resistance. Clad in military fatigues, Arafat spoke of armed struggle and revolution, transforming the PLO into an independent force. With a vision of a secular democratic state replacing Israel on historical Palestine's land, the PLO's aims ignited deep fears among Israelis, who saw only existential threat. For Palestinians, Arafat's movement was a beacon of liberation. The stakes had escalated beyond diplomacy to a battle for identity itself. Then came June 1967, a moment that would rewrite the region's destiny. Nasser's blockade of Israeli shipping through the Straits of Tiran, his demand for UN peacekeepers to leave Sinai, and his military pacts with Jordan and Syria set the stage for confrontation. Israel felt the noose tightening. On June 5th, it struck first, launching a preemptive strike that stunned the world. In just 6 days, Israel devastated the armies of Egypt, Jordan, and Syria. Its air force obliterated enemy planes on the ground. Tank divisions surged through Sinai to the Suez Canal. Jordanian forces were pushed from the West Bank and East Jerusalem, and the Golan Heights slipped from Syrian control. For the first time in 2,000 years, Jerusalem was united under Jewish governance, a triumph steeped in tears from soldiers overwhelmed by the weight of history. Israel tripled its territory overnight. Yet this victory was a double-edged sword, intensifying Arab despair and entrenching divisions that would fuel decades of conflict. The war had ended, but the wounds it opened would bleed endlessly. South Lebanon became a battlefield of shadows for nearly 2 decades, where Israeli troops clashed with Hezbollah guerrillas amid the mountains. The horrific massacre at Sabra and Shatila refugee camps in September 1982 seared a scar into the collective conscience. Christian militias allied with Israel slaughtered hundreds, possibly thousands of Palestinians, while Israeli forces stood by, watchful but silent. The outrage spilled into Israel itself. Hundreds of thousands marched in protest, demanding accountability. The line between ally and enemy blurred in a haze of blood and betrayal. Then came December 1987, the eruption of the First Intifada. Sparked by years of occupation and simmering despair, Palestinian youths took to the streets armed only with stones, confronting soldiers wielding guns and tear gas. Their uprising was raw and spontaneous, a desperate cry for freedom. Israel responded with crushing force: rubber bullets, curfews, school closures, mass arrests. Defense Minister Yitzhak Rabin urged soldiers to break the arms of protesters, a brutal policy that deepened wounds and hardened resolve. The world watched as hope and fear collided violently on the streets. Where does this relentless cycle lead? Who holds the keys to peace when history is a chain of irreversible choices? The answers remain elusive, but the story demands to be told. Subscribe to Quiet History to explore the untold layers of this enduring struggle. What price do we pay for occupation? How long can a people endure the weight of endless conflict? The Intifada raged on relentlessly, stretching over years, turning daily life into a living nightmare for both Palestinians and Israelis. The Israeli public began to grasp a painful truth: occupation carries a heavy cost. But could anyone foresee where this price would lead? In the wake of the Cold War's end and the Gulf War's aftermath, a fragile hope emerged. The world's sole superpower, the United States, stepped forward to broker peace. In 1991, the Madrid Conference brought Israeli and Palestinian delegations face to face for the first time. Behind closed doors in Oslo, secret negotiations unfolded between Israel and the Palestine Liberation Organization. Then, in 1993, history seemed to pivot. The Oslo Accords were signed. Israel recognized the PLO as the legitimate representative of the Palestinian people. The PLO acknowledged Israel's right to exist and renounced terrorism. Plans were laid for a Palestinian autonomy on parts of the West Bank and Gaza, a stepping stone toward a final settlement. Yasser Arafat and Yitzhak Rabin shook hands on the White House lawn, greeted by the applause of a hopeful world. Was peace finally within reach? But in recent years, some Arab states, United Arab Emirates, Bahrain, Sudan, Morocco, normalized relations with Israel without resolving the Palestinian issue. The Abraham Accords signaled a shift. The Arab world was ready to move on. Palestinians felt abandoned, left alone to face the occupiers' grip. What future awaited them? The two-state solution, long championed by the global community, now seemed a fading dream. Settlements had entrenched themselves too deeply. The land was fractured beyond easy repair. A one-state solution, where Israelis and Palestinians would live as equals, appeared utopian. Neither side wanted it. Israel feared losing its Jewish majority. Palestinians rejected minority status in a Jewish state. So, this land, cradle of civilizations, prophets, and empires, now stands as a stark symbol of humanity's failure to resolve conflict peacefully. Palestine mirrors our deepest struggles: nationalism, colonialism, religious extremism, indifference to suffering. Yet it is also a place of incredible resilience. What choices remain when every decision seems irreversible? When fear dictates actions and hope slips away? The story of this land is a chain of fateful decisions, each echoing with consequences that shape the lives of millions. Will the cycle ever break? If you want to understand the true cost of conflict and the fragile threads of peace, subscribe to Quiet History. What if the endless cycle of violence in Palestine is not inevitable? What if the future depends on decisions made today? What price will humanity pay for failure to reconcile? Beneath the surface of decades-old conflict lies a tapestry of human lives, fraught with fear, hope, and irreversible choices that have shaped history and continue to define it. Life pulses stubbornly within the borders of Palestine. Farmers tend ancient olive trees, their roots sunk deep into centuries of soil, while music spills into wedding celebrations. Children laugh and play on cracked streets, oblivious to the shadows looming over their future. Yet this fragile normalcy conceals a dangerous truth. History here is far from over, and every moment carries the weight of what could be lost forever. Consider this: conflicts that seem eternal are not. Northern Ireland emerged from decades of brutal violence into peace. South Africa transcended apartheid's bitter legacy. Germany and France, once fierce enemies for centuries, forged a vital alliance. These transformations demanded courage, leadership, and the painful willingness to confront shared humanity. Could Palestine follow a similar path, or is it trapped in a cycle with no exit? This path requires acknowledging the suffering on both sides, a truth that is often too bitter to face. Compromise here is not a quiet reconciliation, but a violent wrenching apart of old wounds. The international community must move beyond condemnation into active engagement, fostering dialogue where none exists, and nurturing leaders with vision to build forward, not backward. Otherwise, the price will only escalate. Yet amid the turmoil, voices of peace struggle to be heard. Ordinary Israelis and Palestinians meet quietly, daring to understand one another beyond propaganda's roar. Organizations link grieving families from both sides, breaking the relentless cycle of hatred. These unsung heroes fight a silent battle, their stories eclipsed by headlines, but holding the fragile ember of hope. Can their courage withstand the rising tide of division? Palestine's story is a stark warning etched in blood and tears, a testament to how unresolved conflicts ravage generations. Violence begets violence. Revenge breeds only more pain. Security built upon another's oppression is a house of sand destined to collapse. This narrative exposes the catastrophic cost of failing empathy, dialogue, and compromise, a chain of fateful decisions that trap millions in despair. Yet beneath this dark legacy lies a testament to human resilience. Even in the bleakest moments, hope refuses to die. The land that has witnessed prophets and conquerors alike remains a symbol, a challenge to the world's conscience. Will those who wield power today heed the ancient call for redemption, forgiveness, and peace? Or will they condemn this land to eternal strife? Jerusalem, the city whose very name means peace, remains a battleground of clashing dreams. But imagine a day when olive trees, centuries old and scarred by conflict, stand witness to a new era, where Israeli and Palestinian children play together, free from fear, hatred, and walls that divide. This vision is not naive. It is an urgent necessity. Without it, history will only remember a legacy soaked in blood and sorrow. The future of Palestine depends on those ready to break the cycle, leaders who dare to dream beyond revenge, citizens who recognize shared humanity, and a world willing to act, not just watch. The story is still being written, but the ink is running out. Will the next chapter be one of peace or perpetual war? The answer lies in the choices made now. If you believe in a future where peace is possible, where generations can live without fear, where history does not repeat its darkest hours, then this is your call to witness, to remember, and to act. Because silence and inaction only fuel the flames. Subscribe to Quiet History and join the search for truth beneath the conflict, the stories beyond the headlines, and the hope that refuses to fade. The story of Palestine is far from over.